Hello, my name is Kat, and today I want to talk about my favorite books of 2020. So 2020 was a weird reading year for me. I mean, 2020 was a weird year in general, and my reading habits don't even rank on the top list of weird things of 2020, but we're talking about reading, so it was kind of a weird reading year for me. If I only count novels and novellas, then I read maybe 40 books in 2020. I don't really know, because I stopped using Goodreads and I abandoned my bullet journal, and I have the memory of a goldfish. So I think it was around 40. However, if we count manga volumes, then we can add another 70 to my total. And if we're gonna count fanfic, then I had the best reading year of my life. Oh my god, I read so much fanfic. And honestly, no regrets. I had a great time. But anyways, we're not here to talk about my fanfic habits today. Today, I want to share 8 books and series that I now consider to be all-time favorites. And I'm gonna be counting them down in approximate order of how much I loved them. It was hard to rank this list because, again, I have the memory of a goldfish, so for some of these, I was like, did I like this more than that, or did I just read this more recently? But the bottom line is that I love all of these books, so let's get into them. So first up, I have 2 books in a series that has been featured on my channel many times before, but this year I read books 4 and 5 of the Wayward Children series by Shauna Maguire, and I love them! Surprise, surprise! I'm pretty sure every book in this series has made it onto one of my favorites lists, and I think these 2 might be my favorites so far. Basically, this series is a collection of novellas about portal fantasy. We follow a lot of different characters throughout all the books. Some of the books are more standalone adventures that follow a character as they explore one of these portal worlds. And then some of the books take place at this sort of boarding school for children who have returned home from their portal worlds and are not having the easiest of time dealing with being back in the real world. In an Absent Dream is one of the more standalone ones. You could totally read this without reading any of the others. And then this one, Come Tumbling Down, has more of an ensemble cast. And this one is more of a direct continuation. It's mostly about 2 characters that we meet in book 1, and book 2 is sort of a prequel of their story. So this is the 3rd book that's mostly about them, and it kind of the conclusion to their story arc, I feel. We definitely wrapped up some stuff in this one. But yeah, again, I love this series. I love the worlds, and especially the writing, I think is so gorgeous. And yeah, if for some reason you missed it the last 12 times I've talked about this series, I recommend it. It's great. The next book I want to talk about is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune, which I do not have a physical copy of because I listened to the audiobook, which, for the record, was a fantastic audiobook. If you like audiobooks, this was a great one. Now, this book is a little tricky to categorize because I think technically it's an adult novel. The protagonist is 40 years old. But tone and content-wise, this felt like a middle grade. I guess you can't have a 40-year-old protagonist in a middle grade book, but that seems like a technicality. Anyways, this is a standalone fantasy novel, and it was just so wonderful. In this book, we follow a man named Linus who works for Daikoi, the department in charge of magical youth. He is a caseworker, which means he visits orphanages for magical children, and he assesses them. He makes sure the kids are being taken care of, and rules are being followed, and everything's on the up and up. And aside from his job, and sometimes including his job, his life is pretty meh. He doesn't really have any friends. He doesn't even really have friendly coworkers. He doesn't have family in his life. He really just has a cat that he didn't intend to get. She just kind of showed up and never left. And then one day, Linus gets assigned a very unique case. Instead of going to an orphanage for a couple hours to assess like he normally does, he is being sent to this top secret classified orphanage for a full month to properly assess the situation there. And at this highly classified orphanage, there are 6 children who are very unique and powerful and potentially very dangerous. So Linus goes off on this assignment and his whole job is to remain objective. But he finds himself growing emotionally attached to these children and also to the master of the orphanage, a man named Arthur Parnassus. Now, this book wasn't super heavy on the plot. Like, the main focus here is on these characters and their relationships. We explore themes around found family and prejudice and bureaucracy. And I think not having like a dramatic, twisty plot really worked for this book and made it just such a comforting and heartwarming read. It was just lovely and charming and funny with great characters and a really sweet queer romance. And yeah, I loved it and would highly recommend it. The next book that I have here is Opposite of Always by Justin A. Reynolds. This was a Booksplosion Book of the Month for July, I think. I don't know. It was one of the summer months that all blended together. And I just absolutely adored this book. Basically, in this book, we follow a teenage boy named Jack who meets a girl named Kate and they fall for each other. But before they can get to their happily ever after, Kate dies. This is not a spoiler, by the way. This is the whole premise of the book. Because Kate dying is not the end of the story. It's actually kind of the beginning. Because when Kate dies, Jack ends up being sent back in time to when they first meet. So Jack kind of ends up in this time loop where he meets Kate and they fall in love and then he has to try to save her from dying. This book was so good in so many different ways. Like, the first thing that really hooked me was Jack himself, and like especially his narrative voice. Such a strong voice that is so funny and just really propels you through the story. Like, this book is 450 pages and I never got tired of it because I just loved being in Jack's head and going along on his journey. Then the characters, Jack and Kate, are also fantastic. I loved their relationship and their banter. We also meet some of Jack's friends and his parents, and just all of them were great. And then the plot, the whole storyline was also so good. I've kind of recently come to discover how much I love do-over time travel plots. I just really love exploring how making even a small choice can take you down a wildly different path. So yeah, this was a wonderful book. I adored it. And if you want to know more of my spoilery thoughts, this was a Booksplosion Book of the Month, so there is a live show discussion all about it that I'll link down below. Next up is one of the manga series that I just devoured this year, and that is Kamisama Kiss by Julieta Suzuki. This is a 25-volume series that I just flew through in a couple of days. I first watched the anime, which is one of my favorite animes ever, and alas, the anime adaptation doesn't cover the entire manga series. So I finished the anime adaptation and was unfulfilled because it didn't have an ending. So naturally, I had to read the whole series to get that conclusion. Basically, this is a supernatural romantic comedy. We follow a teenage girl named Nanami, whose father has gotten into gambling debt and then kind of peaced out, leaving her to deal with the fallout and also just leaving her homeless. She ends up saving this guy who's being chased by a dog, and in return, he offers her a place to live. But it kind of comes with a catch, because this place to live is a temple, and now Nanami is the god of the temple. She also ends up inheriting Tomoe, who is this fox demon turned familiar, and he is not too pleased with this turn of events. So not only does Nanami have to deal with this new situation where she's now a god, but she also has to put up with this very cynical and reluctant familiar. And yeah, again, I just adored this whole series, both the manga and the anime. I love the relationship between Nanami and Tomoe. Like, the way they bicker and banter and gradually fall in love is just... it's top tier stuff. If you like anime and or manga, then yeah, I definitely recommend Kamisama Kiss. It is fantastic to read and also watch. The next book I have here is Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare, and this is probably not a surprise because Shadowhunter books have consistently made my favorites lists throughout the years. This is the first book in the Last Hours trilogy, and I can't really talk about specifics much because this trilogy follows the Infernal Devices trilogy, and just saying the names of some of the main characters of this book could be considered spoilery for the Infernal Devices. So yeah, I can't really say much about this. As far as first books go, I do think I preferred Clockwork Angel and Lady Midnight over this one, but it's a close thing, and obviously I did still enjoy this book very much for it to be ranking so high on my favorites of the year list. And oh, this was another Booksplosion book of the month, so if you're interested in knowing more of my spoilery thoughts, there is a whole live show discussion that I'll link down below if you want to check that out. The next book that I have here is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. Now, Howl's Moving Castle, the movie, has long been considered one of my favorite movies of all time. And this year, I finally got around to reading the source material. And it was a really interesting reading experience because the book and the movie are so similar in so many ways, but there are also some big differences. And the thing is, despite big differences, I still love both so much. Like, both book and movie are so freaking good in their own ways. Like, I don't know if I could say which one I enjoy more. I might enjoy the book a little bit more. But again, it's hard to compare them. Even though they are so similar, they are different in key ways. One of the differences that I really loved about the book is in the main characters, Sophie and Howl. Now, I love Sophie and Howl in the movie. Like, they are great, and I love their sort of softer, sweeter romance. Book Sophie and book Howl are less sweet and not as soft as their movie counterparts, but I kind of think that they're all the more fun because of that. Oh my god, also there's a plot twist in the book that I did not see coming because it's not in the movie at all, but it is something that I loved. Like, it's the kind of plot twist that I just go feral for. And I am so eager to read more of this series because I believe this is the first book in a trilogy, so there's 2 more books to read. I cannot wait to get my hands on those and get to them. And next up, I have here the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. This is an ongoing series. There are currently 5 installments out. Books 1 through 4 are novellas, and then book 5 was a full-length novel. And I just loved every single installment in this series. I think if I had to choose a favorite, I'd probably go with book 5 because it was a full-length novel, so we just had so much more time and room to like do a more complex plot. But I also really loved the first book. I have it both in ebook and audio, and I've listened to the audiobook like probably 4 or 5 times. I have the audiobook for the 5th installment as well, and they're such good audiobooks. Oh, the narration is fantastic. So this is a sci-fi series where our main character is Murderbot, a construct that is part human but mostly robot. Murderbot is a sec unit or a security unit, and it's kind of rented out to humans exploring new dangerous planets. Every sec unit has a governor module, this chip that basically takes away their free will and makes it so they can't harm any humans or disobey any direct orders. Our main character, Murderbot, has hacked its governor module and disabled it. And instead of becoming a ruthless killing machine, it has just downloaded like a ton of media and spends all of its downtime just watching trashy TV. And Murderbot still does its job. Like, it still protects the humans. It just has its own free will again. But it can't let anyone discover that because sec units are like serious threats. They're walking weapons. And especially with how some of them are treated, like no one would be surprised if a sec unit went rogue and went on a murderous rampage. But Murderbot doesn't want to go on a murderous rampage. Murderbot just wants to watch its TV shows in peace. And that would be easier to do if the humans it was protecting could just stop getting themselves almost killed. These books are just so fun and so cool and so funny. The series is written in first person from Murderbot's perspective. And Murderbot is such a great narrator, such a great protagonist. Like, Murderbot is very antisocial and pessimistic and just has this great dry sense of humor. It's also in constant denial over its own feelings because feelings are like a messy human thing. It's just such a fun contradiction where Murderbot is like, I don't really care about the humans, but if you hurt them, I will rip out your intestines. I just love Murderbot. Like, it's so protective and badass and funny and socially awkward, which is also very funny. And the books, the adventures that we go on with Murderbot are so much fun. I love this series. I highly recommend it. And I am so very excited for the next installment, which is coming out this spring. And finally, my favorite thing that I read this year. It was really close between this and the Murderbot Diaries. Like, I kept going back and forth on which one would rank slightly higher. And ultimately, this won out because of how entirely obsessed I became with this series. My favorite thing that I read in 2020 is haikyuu. This is a 45-volume manga series about volleyball. And yeah, when I first heard about it, I had very little interest in it. Like, I don't really care about sports, so what on earth is going to motivate me to read a 45-volume manga about volleyball? Well, I started with the anime adaptation, and oh my god, this series has some of the best storytelling I've ever encountered. We have amazing friendships and rivalries. There's so many great rivalries. Like, oh my god, this show does rivalries so well. You know, from two people on the same team who work together and who are also rivals, to things like rival teams that have long histories of rivalries. The characters and their dynamics are just so good. Like, you can just tell that there is so much care and attention given to developing every single character. Like, I could do a whole video analyzing just their names and like the meaning in some of their names. And aside from all the amazing characters and the relationships, like, the volleyball is also so cool. Like, I never thought I would be so invested in volleyball, and I played volleyball in junior high. And like, maybe I read too much fantasy and I'm reaching here, but the volleyball is almost treated like a magic system. But yeah, I first watched the anime several times, just back to back. It consumed my life for a couple weeks. But then I had a problem because the anime only covered about half of the manga series. So I had to go read the entire manga twice. I mean, the final arc of the manga did ruin my life in several ways. and most of them were good. There was a moment where I was just utterly devastated at the beginning of the final arc. And I don't want to get more specific because I don't want to spoil anything. But, yeah, man, that final arc of Haikyuu, oh boy. So yeah, this year, 2020, I spent a solid month just watching and reading Haikyuu over and over again. I loved it that much. It's one of my favorite things of all things, and definitely my favorite thing that I read in 2020. Okay, that is it. There you have it. Those are my favorite reads of 2020, and that's gonna do it for this video today. Thank you so very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you have a wonderful night, and I will have another video up soon, so I will see you then. Bye!